I've always been fascinated by stories that whisper about things unseen, ghosts, spirits, and the strange echoes of lives once lived. Growing up, I devoured every book and documentary I could find on the paranormal, feeling a mix of excitement and unease whenever tales of hauntings or ghostly encounters surfaced. It wasn't just curiosity, it was a yearning to understand something beyond the obvious, something that seemed to slip through the cracks of everyday reality. This fascination followed me into adulthood, nudging me to explore these mysteries more deeply. A few years ago, I decided to channel this obsession into something creative. I wanted to bring these ghost stories to life, but in a way that felt intimate and immersive. Animation seemed like the perfect medium, able to capture the eerie atmosphere and the subtle nuances of fear and wonder that often get lost in retellings. I began collecting true accounts from people who had encountered ghosts, listening carefully to their experiences, the way their voices would falter or quicken when describing moments that defied explanation. This project became more than just storytelling, it was a journey into the unknown, a way to peel back layers of reality and glimpse what might be lurking just out of sight. I hope that by animating these stories, viewers could feel the tension, the dread, and sometimes the strange comfort that comes with confronting the supernatural. It was an invitation to step into a world where the line between the living and the dead blurs, where shadows hold secrets, and silence can be as loud as a scream. One of the earliest stories I animated came from a family who had moved into an old Victorian house. Their tale was filled with subtle but unsettling details, strange noises echoing through empty hallways, fleeting shadows that darted just beyond the edge of vision. From the moment they stepped inside, there was an atmosphere thick with something unspoken, a presence that seemed to watch and wait. The house itself felt like a character, creaking and groaning as if trying to communicate its own secrets. The family described their first night vividly. After unpacking, they settled into the living room, the glow of the fireplace casting dancing shadows on the walls. It was then that they heard it, a soft tapping, like fingernails gently rapping on wood, coming from the far end of the hallway. At first, they thought it might be the wind or the old pipes, but the sound continued, rhythmic and deliberate. The father, trying to reassure his wife and children, went to investigate, but the hallway was empty and still. The silence that followed was heavier than before, as if the house was holding its breath. These moments set the tone for what was to come. Over the next few days, the family noticed more strange occurrences, doors that would open or close on their own, lights flickering without explanation, and cold spots that seemed to follow them through certain rooms. The children spoke of seeing a woman in a long dress standing at the top of the staircase, only to vanish when approached. The parents, skeptical yet unnerved, began documenting these events, hoping to find rational explanations. But the more they tried, the more elusive the truth became. Their story captured the essence of a haunting not as a sudden, violent terror but as a persistent, creeping unease. It was the kind of fear that infiltrates the everyday, turning familiar spaces into landscapes of uncertainty. The family's attempts to maintain normalcy were slowly eroded by the house's quiet insistence that it was not empty. The shadows lengthened, and the tapping continued, each sound a reminder that something unseen was sharing their home. Working on animating this story, I wanted to convey that subtle tension, the way fear doesn't always roar but sometimes whispers. The visuals leaned into muted colors and shifting shadows, with the house looming large and almost alive. The sound design was crucial, the creaks, the taps, the faintest rustle of fabric all built a soundscape that kept viewers on edge, mirroring the family's growing apprehension. I aimed for the audience to feel like they were stepping just 1 foot behind the veil, sensing the presence without fully seeing it. What stayed with me most from this story was how the family grappled with disbelief. They wanted to dismiss what they were experiencing but found themselves drawn deeper into the mystery. Their fear was laced with confusion and a strange kind of respect for the ghostly occupant. It wasn't about evil spirits or malevolent forces, it was about something lingering, unfinished, a history etched into the very walls of the house. This narrative set the foundation for the project, grounding the supernatural in the realm of the relatable. It wasn't just about ghosts for the sake of fright, but about the human experience of encountering the unknown. The story invited viewers to consider what it means to live alongside something that defies explanation, and how those moments challenge our understanding of reality. As I continued to gather and animate more stories, this first one remained a touchstone, a reminder that sometimes the most chilling encounters are not the loud, dramatic ones but those that quietly unsettle us, lingering in the corners of our vision and the edges of our minds. The house, the tapping, the shadows, they all became symbols of that fragile boundary between the seen and the unseen, a boundary that I was eager to explore further in the stories to come. After laying the groundwork with the family's story in the Victorian house, I found myself drawn deeper into the eerie atmosphere that settles in places long untouched by time. The next tale that surfaced was one that began much like the last, a family moving into a new home, but this one carried a different weight, a feeling that something unseen was waiting patiently beneath the surface, ready to reveal itself in small but disturbing ways. The family, eager for a fresh start, had purchased an old farmhouse on the outskirts of a quiet town. The house was charming in its worn state, with creaky wooden floors, peeling wallpaper, and a porch that wrapped around the front and side like an embrace. They moved in during early autumn, when the trees were shedding their leaves in fiery shades of orange and red, the air crisp with the promise of change. Yet, from the very first night, there was a strange energy in the house that none of them could explain. It began softly, footsteps echoing in the hallway when no one was there, doors gently closing behind them, and the occasional whisper of voices just beyond hearing. The family's youngest child would often point to corners of the room and say she saw a lady standing there, though no one else could. At first, they dismissed these as remnants of an old house settling, or the vivid imagination of a child adjusting to a new place. But as days turned into weeks, the occurrences became harder to ignore. One evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, the lights flickered and dimmed, casting long shadows across the walls. The mother recalled the sudden drop in temperature, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and refuses to leave. They all felt it, a chill that pulled their attention to the hallway just beyond the kitchen. There, a faint silhouette seemed to hover, indistinct but unmistakably human in shape. The room grew heavy with silence, the kind that presses down on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. These moments were the first hints of a presence that was no longer content to remain hidden. The family started to notice objects shifting slightly, chairs moved just enough out of place to be noticed, a vase tilted as if nudged by invisible hands. At night, the creaks and groans of the house took on a different tone, almost like whispers traveling through the walls. The tension mounted slowly, a creeping sense of being watched that gnawed at their peace. Capturing this story in animation was a challenge because the fear wasn't sudden or explosive, it was slow, methodical. It crept in like a shadow stretching at dusk, subtle but relentless. I wanted the visuals to reflect this growing unease, the dimming lights, the wavering shadows, the way the house seemed to breathe and pulse with hidden life. The hallways were drawn longer, the corners darker, and the rooms emptied of warmth, save for the flickering glow of candles or a lone lamp struggling against the darkness. Sound design played a crucial role in building the atmosphere. The faintest creaks, soft whispers, the distant clatter of a door, these sounds invited the viewer into the family's experience, making the unseen presence feel tangible. The silence between these noises was just as important, a pregnant pause that allowed the tension to swell. It was in these quiet moments that fear rooted itself most deeply, the anticipation of something just out of sight. The family's attempts to rationalize what was happening only deepened the mystery. They called in experts to check for drafts or faulty wiring, hoping to explain the cold spots and flickering lights. But nothing tangible was found. The house seemed to resist explanation, as if the very walls were guarding their secrets jealously. The family started keeping a journal, noting every strange event, every unexplained noise, hoping that documentation might bring clarity or comfort. Instead, it only amplified their sense of intrusion, as if recording the events somehow acknowledged the presence and gave it strength. One night stands out in their memory, a night when the usual sounds escalated into something more tangible. The mother was awoken by the sound of footsteps pacing slowly down the hallway outside her bedroom. She lay still, heart pounding, listening as the steps stopped abruptly outside the door. Then, a knock, soft but deliberate. Summoning courage, she opened the door, but the hallway was empty, bathed only in the pale light of the moon filtering through the window. The silence that followed was suffocating, a void filled with unspoken questions. This event marked a turning point in the family's perception. The presence was no longer a distant observer but an active participant in their lives. The house had shifted from being a home to something else, a place where past and present collided, where the unseen lingered just beyond the veil. The family's fear mingled with curiosity, a complex blend of emotions that made leaving difficult despite their growing unease. Animating that moment was delicate work. The pacing footsteps, the hesitant knock, the tense pause before the door opened, all had to be carefully balanced to maintain suspense without resorting to cheap scares. The hallway stretched endlessly, framed by peeling wallpaper and worn floorboards that seemed to pulse with life. The mother's trembling hand reached for the doorknob, the frame tightening around her face to capture the mix of fear and resolve. The empty corridor beyond was rendered in muted grays and blues, a liminal space suspended between reality and something else. What fascinated me most about this story was the slow build, the way the haunting unfolded over time, becoming an almost living presence that shaped the family's everyday life. It wasn't just about ghostly apparitions but about the intangible feeling of being watched, of the boundaries between the living and the dead blurring in a place that had seen generations pass through its doors. This story deepened my understanding of how hauntings often feel less like sudden shocks and more like ongoing conversations with the past. The house, with its creaks and cold spots, became a vessel for memories and emotions, an echo chamber for unresolved histories. The family's experience was a reminder that sometimes, the most unsettling hauntings are those that grow slowly, embedding themselves in the fabric of daily life until they become impossible to ignore. As I prepared to move on to the next story, I carried with me the weight of this quiet terror, the kind that lingers in empty hallways and in the spaces between words. It was a haunting not just of a house, but of time itself, a reminder that some places hold on to their stories long after the people have gone. And in those stories, the ghosts find their voice. As the story of the farmhouse family unfolded, their experiences began to shift from subtle disturbances to moments that were impossible to ignore. The once quiet creaks and shadows grew bolder, more insistent, as if the presence within the walls was awakening, revealing itself with increasing urgency. This escalation marked a turning point not just for the family, but for the entire atmosphere of the house, which seemed to pulse with a restless energy. Objects started moving on their own with greater frequency. A chair nudged slightly away from the dining table, a book slid off a shelf without cause, and doors that had merely creaked before now slammed shut with force. These incidents were no longer isolated, they formed a pattern, a slow crescendo that filled the household with a tense, watchful fear. The family tried to keep their routine, but each unexplained event chipped away at their sense of normalcy. One particularly unsettling experience came when the family's teenage son was in his room late at night. He was sitting at his desk doing homework when suddenly the lamp flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. Moments later, the pages of his textbook began to rustle, as if an invisible hand was flipping through them. The boy's heart raced as he reached for his phone to turn on the flashlight, but as the beam cut across the room, the pages stopped moving, and an icy chill swept through the space. He later described feeling as if he was being watched, his skin prickling with a cold that no blanket could chase away. These incidents prompted the family to start documenting everything, capturing photos and videos whenever possible. They hoped that evidence would either explain the phenomenon or at least validate their experiences. Some of the footage showed inexplicable shadows darting across rooms, objects shifting slightly between frames, and cold spots that registered on thermal cameras as frigid pockets in the middle of warm rooms. The family shared these findings with friends and paranormal investigators, seeking answers that were stubbornly out of reach. The atmosphere within the house grew heavier as the days passed. Family members reported cold spots that appeared without warning, pockets of freezing air that seemed to follow them from room to room. These chills were accompanied by a sensation of pressure, like invisible hands pressing against their shoulders or backs. The children, once playful and carefree, became withdrawn and anxious, often speaking about an unseen watcher who lingered just beyond sight. The mother described waking one night to find her bedroom door slowly creaking open, revealing a darkened hallway beyond. In the doorway stood a shadowy figure, indistinct but unmistakably human in shape. She froze, unable to move or call out, as the figure remained motionless before silently retreating into the darkness. The encounter left her shaken, her dreams haunted by the image of the silent visitor. This escalation of paranormal activity created a palpable tension that saturated every corner of the home. The family's daily lives became a careful dance around the unseen forces that seemed to govern the space. They spoke in hushed tones, wary of provoking whatever presence lingered there. Yet despite the fear, there was a strange mix of fascination and resignation, an acknowledgement that they were no longer alone in the house. Animating this phase of the story demanded a shift in tone and visual style. The colors deepened, shadows grew thicker, and the house itself seemed to breathe with a restless energy. Scenes were punctuated by sudden movements, a door slamming, a book falling, a lamp flickering, each event designed to jolt the viewer while maintaining an underlying sense of dread. The soundscape was layered with eerie whispers, distant footsteps, and the subtle creak of wood shifting under unseen weight. I wanted viewers to feel the growing intensity, the way fear can build not with loud screams but with persistent, unexplainable events that erode your sense of safety. The animation captured the family's escalating anxiety, the way their eyes darted nervously, the tentative glances toward empty corners where shadows seemed to gather. It was a delicate balance, conveying terror without overwhelming the story, allowing the audience to inhabit the slow burn of a haunting that refuses to be ignored. The family's documentation efforts added an interesting layer to the narrative. Their videos and photos became tangible proof of the supernatural, blurring the line between belief and skepticism. I incorporated these elements into the animation, showing grainy footage and distorted images that hinted at something lurking just out of frame. This approach reinforced the idea that the haunting was not just a figment of imagination but a persistent reality pressing against their world. Emotionally, this chapter revealed the toll the haunting took on the family. The children's fear was palpable, their once bright and energetic spirits dimmed by the constant presence of something unknown. The parents wrestled with the desire to protect their children and the growing realization that they were powerless to stop what was happening. Their hope for a fresh start had been overshadowed by a creeping dread that settled like a fog over their lives. One poignant moment the family shared was their decision to gather in the living room one evening, holding hands and attempting to confront the presence directly. They spoke aloud, asking if the spirit wanted to communicate, if it was trapped or in pain. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, a cold breeze swept through the room, and the flickering lights seemed to pulse in response. The family felt a strange connection then, a fleeting glimpse of something beyond fear, an acknowledgement that the house held a story yet to be told. Animating this emotional climax was a challenge. I wanted to convey not just the fear but the vulnerability and courage it took for the family to face the unknown together. The scene was quiet, intimate, with close-ups capturing trembling hands and faces illuminated by candlelight. The cold wind was rendered almost like a visible mist, swirling around them as if carrying the spirit's presence. It was a moment of fragile hope amidst the mounting tension. This phase of the haunting underscored the complex relationship between the living and the dead. The escalating paranormal activity wasn't just about scares, it was about an unseen entity trying to make itself known, to bridge the gap between worlds. The family's experience became a testament to how hauntings often manifest as persistent, growing phenomena that demand attention and respect. As I wrapped up animating this chapter, I reflected on the power of increasing paranormal activity to transform a house into a place charged with emotion and history. The family's story was a vivid example of how the supernatural can seep into daily life, shifting perceptions and altering realities. It was a haunting that spoke not just to fear, but to the deep human need to understand what lies beyond, even when the answers remain just out of reach. The night everything changed arrived without warning, slipping in like a shadow that swallowed the house whole. Until then, the family had endured the mounting disturbances, moving objects, cold spots, whispers in the dark, with a mixture of fear and resignation. But on this night, the presence stepped forward, no longer content to linger on the edges of their awareness. It revealed itself in a way that would haunt them forever. It was well past midnight when the mother awoke to a strange sensation, an oppressive stillness that had settled over the house. The usual creaks and groans of the old farmhouse were absent, replaced by a thick silence that pressed against her chest. She lay frozen for a moment, heart pounding, senses straining to detect any sound. Then, from the darkness of the hallway outside her bedroom, a faint glow appeared, a pale, bluish light that shimmered like moonlight filtered through mist. Drawn by a mixture of terror and curiosity, she slipped from her bed and crept toward the door. The glow grew brighter, coalescing into a figure standing just beyond the threshold. It was a woman, ethereal and translucent, dressed in flowing garments that swayed as if caught in an unseen breeze. Her face was both beautiful and sorrowful, eyes deep pools of sadness that seemed to reach out across time. The mother's breath caught in her throat. The apparition did not speak but gestured softly, as if beckoning her to follow. The air around the figure was cold, yet charged with an otherworldly energy that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. She wanted to flee, to slam the door and hide beneath the covers, but something held her in place, a silent plea woven into the woman's gaze. As she stepped into the hallway, the shadows around them danced and stretched, elongating like fingers reaching toward the light. The apparition moved down the corridor, leading her past rooms bathed in the soft glow of moonlight. The house seemed to breathe with them, walls pulsing faintly as if alive, carrying echoes of the past in its creaking bones. The mother followed wordlessly until they reached the staircase. There, the figure paused and turned, eyes locking with hers in a moment heavy with unspoken meaning. The sorrow in those eyes told a story of loss, regret, and a life interrupted. Then, as quietly as she had appeared, the apparition faded into the darkness, leaving behind a lingering chill and a heart pounding with disbelief. This encounter marked the climax of the haunting, the moment when the unseen became undeniable, when the family could no longer deny the reality of what they faced. It was a turning point that shifted their relationship with the house from one of fear to one of urgent need to understand. Animating this encounter was both a challenge and a privilege. I wanted to capture the fragile beauty and profound sadness of the apparition, to convey her presence not as a source of terror but as a messenger caught between worlds. The glow of the ghost was rendered with soft blues and silvers, her form shimmering like a fragile flame in the night. The house around her was depicted with muted earth tones, shadows stretching and twisting in response to her presence. The sound design played a pivotal role in immersing the viewer. The silence of the house was punctuated by a subtle, haunting melody, like a lullaby forgotten by time, woven through the creaks and whispers. The mother's breathing and footsteps were amplified to emphasize her vulnerability, while a barely audible sigh seemed to drift on the air as the apparition vanished. This spectral visitation was not just a scare but a story in itself, a glimpse into a life once lived and the unresolved emotions that tethered the spirit to the mortal realm. It suggested that the haunting was more than random disturbances, it was a lingering imprint of history, a soul reaching out for recognition or release. In the days that followed, the family grappled with what they had witnessed. The mother tried to piece together who the woman might have been, researching the history of the house and the land it stood on. She discovered stories of a young woman who had lived there long ago, whose life had ended tragically and whose spirit was rumored to still haunt the property. The connection between past and present became undeniable, adding layers of depth and poignancy to their experience. The family's fear evolved into a sullen respect. The house was no longer just haunted, it was a repository of memories, a bridge between worlds. Their encounters had moved from frightening to deeply emotional, underscoring the complex nature of ghostly phenomena not merely as sources of terror but as echoes of human experience. This pivotal moment in the story highlighted the power of a ghost's manifestation to transform not only the haunted but the haunting. The apparition's appearance was a call to listen, to acknowledge the pain and stories that linger in forgotten places. It was a reminder that behind every haunting lies a tale waiting to be told, a life that once was. Animating this scene pushed me to explore the boundaries between the visible and invisible, to create a visual language that spoke to sorrow and beauty intertwined. The delicate movements of the ghost, the shifting shadows of the house, and the mother's tentative steps formed a choreography of emotion and mystery. It was a silent conversation across time, captured frame by frame. Reflecting on this encounter, I realized how deeply personal and transformative such experiences can be. For the family, the apparition's revelation was a moment that shattered disbelief and invited empathy. They were no longer just witnesses to a haunting, they became caretakers of a story that transcended death, bound by a shared experience that altered their understanding of life and what lies beyond. This story segment became a cornerstone for the project, illustrating the climax of a haunting's narrative arc, the point where the supernatural reveals itself fully, demanding recognition and respect. It set the stage for exploring the aftermath, the ripple effects on those who have looked into the unknown and returned forever changed. As I moved forward with the animation, I remained mindful of the delicate balance between fear and compassion, terror and tenderness. This apparition was not a monster to be vanquished but a spirit to be understood, a poignant reminder of the human stories that haunt us all in ways seen and unseen. In the quiet that followed the apparition's disappearance, the family found themselves caught between disbelief and a profound sense of unease. The encounter had shattered the fragile boundaries they'd maintained between the natural and the supernatural, leaving them adrift in a space where certainty no longer held firm. The house, once merely a home with occasional strange noises, had become a vessel of the unknown, an entity that demanded acknowledgement, reflection, and a reckoning with the unseen. The days that followed were marked by a strange mix of fear and introspection. The family grappled with what they had experienced, each member processing the event in their own way. The mother, in particular, found herself haunted not only by the memory of the ethereal woman but by the weight of questions left unanswered. Who was this spirit? What was her story? Why had she chosen to reveal herself now, after years of silence? The search for answers became a quiet obsession, pulling the family deeper into the mystery. Sleep became elusive. Nights were restless, filled with vivid dreams that blurred the lines between past and present. Shadows seemed to linger longer in corners, and the house's creaks and whispers took on new meaning, no longer random disturbances but messages from a world just beyond reach. The children, once frightened by the noises, now spoke less, their eyes reflecting a mixture of fear and wonder, as if they sensed something their parents could not fully grasp. The psychological toll was palpable. The family found themselves questioning their own perceptions, struggling to reconcile the tangible reality of their lives with the intangible presence that had made itself known. The mother described moments of doubt, wondering if exhaustion or imagination had played tricks on her senses, only to be confronted again by inexplicable evidence. This oscillation between skepticism and belief created a fragile mental landscape, one where certainty was elusive and fear lingered like a shadow. In an attempt to reclaim a sense of normalcy, the family sought support from friends, neighbors, and even paranormal experts. Yet, their story was met with a mix of skepticism and sympathy. Some dismissed their experiences as stress-induced hallucinations or the tricks of an old house, while others offered comfort and shared similar tales. But no matter the response, the family felt increasingly isolated by their knowledge of what lay beneath the surface of their home. This period of reflection also brought moments of unexpected clarity. The family began to see the haunting not merely as a source of fear but as an invitation to connect, to listen to the echoes of the past and the stories etched into the very walls around them. They started researching the history of the house and the land it occupied, uncovering tales of love, loss, and tragedy that seemed to resonate with the spirit they had encountered. This knowledge transformed their fear into a cautious empathy, a recognition that the haunting was tied to unresolved histories yearning for acknowledgement. Animating this phase of the story required a shift in tone, a move away from overt fear toward a more nuanced exploration of emotional and psychological complexity. The visuals softened, colors muted to grays and blues that suggested melancholy and contemplation. The house was portrayed less as a threatening presence and more as a silent witness, its walls holding stories waiting to be heard. The family's faces were drawn with expressions of introspection and vulnerability, capturing the inner turmoil that accompanies encounters with the inexplicable. Sound played a subtle but powerful role in conveying this atmosphere. The creaks and whispers persisted but were interwoven with moments of silence and gentle ambient tones that evoked reflection rather than terror. The occasional distant sigh or soft breeze suggested the ongoing presence of the spirit, a reminder that the story was far from over. Emotional music underscored the scenes, inviting viewers to share in the family's journey from fear to understanding. One particularly poignant sequence showed the family gathered around a table strewn with old photographs, letters, and newspaper clippings. Their faces illuminated by the soft glow of a lamp, they pieced together fragments of the past, their expressions shifting from confusion to recognition. This montage was designed to highlight the human desire to make sense of the unknown, to find connection and meaning even when faced with the inexplicable. Throughout this segment, themes of uncertainty and acceptance were central. The family's experience underscored how encounters with the supernatural often leave more questions than answers, challenging our need for concrete explanations. It illuminated the emotional complexity that arises when the familiar world is pierced by the mysterious, a blend of fear, curiosity, grief, and empathy that can linger long after the initial experience. The psychological aftermath also revealed the resilience of the human spirit. Despite the fear and confusion, the family chose to stay, to face the haunting rather than flee from it. Their journey became one of courage and adaptation, learning to live alongside the presence in their home while seeking to understand its origins and purpose. This resilience added depth to the narrative, portraying hauntings not just as tales of terror but as profound human experiences that touch on our deepest fears and hopes. Animating these emotional and psychological layers allowed me to explore the haunting beyond its surface scares. It became clear that the true power of ghost stories lies not just in the supernatural events themselves but in how they affect the lives and hearts of those who encounter them. The family's reflections, fears, and moments of connection offered viewers a window into the complex interplay between the living and the dead, the known and the unknown. This chapter of the story was essential in grounding the haunting in human experience. It moved the narrative from external manifestations to internal impact, emphasizing how ghostly encounters ripple through minds and souls long after the apparitions fade. The family's struggle with disbelief and fear, their search for understanding, and their growing empathy painted a rich, textured portrait of what it means to live with the unseen. As the animation came to life, I aimed to honor the fragility and strength found in these moments of personal reflection. The story invited viewers to contemplate their own beliefs and fears about the supernatural, to recognize the emotional truths that hauntings reveal about loss, memory, and the enduring mystery of what lies beyond our grasp. It was a delicate balance, capturing the haunting's psychological aftermath without offering easy answers, leaving space for wonder and uncertainty to coexist. Through this segment, the narrative deepened, preparing the way for the stories yet to come. It reminded me that behind every ghost story is a human heart grappling with the unknown, a family forever changed by the glimpse of something beyond the veil. And in that glimpse lies the haunting's true power, the ability to transform fear into a search for meaning, and mystery into a shared journey into the unexplained. After immersing myself in the intimate and unsettling world of the farmhouse haunting, I wanted to bring a fresh perspective to the series, a story set against a vastly different backdrop, where history and the paranormal collided in stark relief. This next tale took me to a place marked by conflict and memory, a historic battlefield where the echoes of past violence still seem to reverberate through the air. A group of friends had gathered for a weekend retreat near this old battlefield, drawn by the beauty of the rolling fields and the allure of stepping into a place steeped in history. They were not ghost hunters or thrill seekers, just friends looking to unwind, hike, and soak in the stories of a land that had witnessed so much loss. But what began as a peaceful escape soon turned into an encounter with something neither expected nor fully understood. On their second evening, as twilight bled into night, the group decided to explore the remnants of the battlefield. The field stretched out before them, dotted with weathered monuments and plaques commemorating the soldiers who had fought and died there. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of earth and grass, but beneath the surface lay a tension that seemed to pulse faintly in the dusk. As they wandered, the friends began to notice odd sensations, an inexplicable chill that seemed to rise from the ground, the distant sound of marching footsteps fading in and out like a forgotten melody. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, and the fading light cast eerie shapes that danced just beyond the corner of their eyes. They joked nervously about ghosts, but the humor was thin, barely masking the unease settling over them. Then, as darkness enveloped the field, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. From the depths of the night, figures began to materialize, soldiers in faded uniforms, their forms shimmering and indistinct, as if caught between worlds. They moved in formation, reenacting the motions of a long-past battle with solemn precision. The friends watched in stunned silence as the phantom soldiers marched across the field, their faces etched with determination and sorrow. The scene was hauntingly beautiful and deeply unsettling, a ghostly reenactment of history playing out before them. The friends felt simultaneously drawn to and repelled by the vision, sensing the weight of sacrifice and the lingering pain of conflict carried by these spectral figures. The battlefield, once just a place of memory, had become a stage for the spirits of those who had never truly left. Animating this story required a shift in visual language to capture both the grandeur and the melancholy of the setting. The colors were muted earth tones, with the ghosts rendered in translucent blues and grays, their movements fluid yet fragmented, as if caught in a perpetual loop. The landscape stretched wide and open, with the contrast between the living and the dead emphasized by the play of light and shadow across the fields. Sound was again crucial, marching footsteps echoed softly, mingling with distant cannon fire and the faint murmur of commands. The ambient noises of the night, crickets, rustling leaves, a distant owl, were layered beneath these sounds to ground the scene in reality while maintaining an eerie otherworldliness. The friends' whispered reactions were woven into the soundscape, their voices a fragile thread connecting past and present. One of the friends, visibly affected by the encounter, lingered closer to the apparitions, her gaze fixed on a particular soldier whose face seemed to hold a mix of pain and resolve. She felt a strange connection, as if the spirit was reaching out to her across time, sharing a silent story of courage and loss. This emotional undercurrent added depth to the narrative, illustrating how ghostly encounters can transcend fear to evoke empathy and reflection. The story's setting on a battlefield introduced themes of history and memory that contrasted sharply with the domestic hauntings I had explored before. Here, the ghosts were not random disturbances but echoes of collective trauma, manifestations of a past that refused to be forgotten. The friends' experience became a meditation on the cost of conflict and the ways in which places bear the imprint of human suffering long after the last shot is fired. Animating the friends' reactions was as important as depicting the ghosts themselves. Their mixture of awe, fear, and sorrow conveyed the profound impact of witnessing something beyond the ordinary. The tension between their desire to understand and the overwhelming reality of the apparition's presence underscored the emotional complexity of the encounter. It was a reminder that ghost stories often serve as bridges to history, connecting us to lives and events that shaped the world in ways we cannot fully grasp. This story also explored the idea of liminal spaces, places where the veil between past and present thins, allowing moments of contact between the living and the dead. The battlefield, with its layered histories and charged atmosphere, became a powerful symbol of such a threshold. The friends' experience was a fleeting crossing into that space, a glimpse of the unresolved grief and honor that lingered in the land itself. As I animated this segment, I focused on creating a mood that was both haunting and reverent. The ghostly soldiers were not menacing, they were echoes of history, caught in a timeless reenactment of duty and sacrifice. The friends' journey became a quiet exploration of memory and the human need to remember and bear witness, even when the past is painful and unresolved. This story brought a new dimension to the project, expanding the scope of ghostly encounters from personal hauntings to collective ones. It highlighted how the paranormal can serve as a conduit for history, reminding us that the dead are not just spirits but keepers of stories that shape our understanding of identity and loss. Through the friends' eyes, viewers were invited to reflect on the weight of history and the enduring presence of those who came before. The battlefield tale contrasted with the earlier domestic hauntings, enriching the overall narrative with its blend of history, emotion, and the supernatural. It demonstrated the diversity of ghost stories and their ability to touch on universal themes: fear, memory, loss, and the longing for connection. By placing the paranormal within a broader historical context, the story offered a new lens through which to view the mysteries that haunt us all. As I prepared to continue the series, this story remained vivid in my mind, a haunting tableau of spectral soldiers marching through time, their silent presence a testament to the enduring power of memory. It was a reminder that sometimes, the ghosts we encounter are not just remnants of individual lives but echoes of collective experiences that shaped the fabric of our world. Among the group of friends who witnessed the ghostly reenactment on the battlefield, one in particular found herself deeply touched by the experience in a way that lingered long after the others had moved on. Her name was Emma, and unlike her companions, who viewed the apparition as a haunting spectacle, she felt a profound connection to the figures before her, especially to one soldier whose presence seemed to reach beyond the veil of time and space. Emma had always been sensitive to stories of the past, drawn to history not just as dates and facts but as human lives intertwined with sorrow and hope. Standing there on that field, watching the translucent soldiers march in endless formation, she felt something shift within her. The soldier who caught her attention was distinct, his face etched with weariness and resolve, eyes that carried the weight of countless battles fought and losses endured. As the apparition's presence enveloped her, Emma described a sensation of warmth amid the cold night air, a pulse of emotion that transcended fear and curiosity. It was as if the spirit was reaching out to her, sharing a silent story of courage, sacrifice, and unfinished business. For Emma, this encounter was no longer just a ghost story, it was a bridge connecting her to a past life, a soul longing to be remembered and understood. In the days that followed their retreat, Emma found herself haunted not by fear but by empathy. The battlefield's spectral soldiers had left an indelible mark on her heart, stirring reflections on mortality, memory, and the enduring impact of history on the present. She began researching the battle itself, reading letters and diaries from soldiers who had fought there, seeking to understand the human stories behind the ghosts. Emma's connection to the soldier's spirit grew into a personal journey, a way to honor the sacrifices made and to give voice to those silenced by war. She felt compelled to share the experience, not as a tale of terror but as a testament to resilience and the power of remembrance. Her reflections added an emotional depth to the story, illustrating how ghostly encounters can evoke compassion and inspire us to confront the legacies of loss and trauma. Animating Emma's experience was a delicate task. I wanted to portray her emotional journey authentically, capturing the subtle shifts from awe to sorrow to determination. Her face was drawn with a softness that conveyed vulnerability and strength, eyes reflecting the weight of the encounter and her evolving understanding. Scenes showed her wandering through archives, tracing the faded ink of wartime letters, her movements slow and deliberate, as if absorbing the echoes of the past. The soldier's apparition was rendered with a quiet dignity, his form more solid and detailed when seen through Emma's eyes, symbolizing the personal connection she felt. Moments of silent communication between them were visualized through fleeting glances and shared expressions, emphasizing the unspoken bond that transcended life and death. The battlefield itself became a canvas for memory, its rolling hills and weathered monuments framing this intimate dialogue between past and present. sound design played a vital role in conveying the emotional nuances. The distant boom of cannon fire and the rhythmic march of soldiers contrasted with the gentle rustling of pages and soft sighs of remembrance. Emma's voice, sometimes whispering passages from letters, added a human element that grounded the supernatural in real emotion. The music swelled and softened, evoking the bittersweet nature of memory and loss. This segment of the story expanded the narrative beyond fear and mystery, delving into themes of empathy, grief, and the human need to remember. Emma's journey illustrated how ghost stories can serve as portals to deeper understanding, inviting us to reflect on the costs of conflict and the ways in which the past continues to shape the present. Her connection to the soldier's spirit became a metaphor for the enduring ties between the living and the dead, between history and memory. The emotional depth of Emma's experience contrasted with the initial awe and fear of the group, adding complexity to the story. It revealed that encounters with the supernatural are not monolithic but varied, shaped by individual perception, emotion, and context. For Emma, the haunting was a catalyst for healing and remembrance, a reminder that ghosts often carry stories that demand to be heard with compassion rather than fear. Animating this emotional layer allowed me to explore the transformative power of ghostly encounters. The visual and auditory elements worked together to create a space where viewers could engage with the story on a personal level, feeling the weight of loss and the hope embedded in memory. Emma's reflections invited the audience to consider their own relationships with history and the unseen, encouraging a deeper empathy for those whose lives have been touched by trauma. This story also highlighted the role of storytelling itself as a means of connection, preservation, and understanding. Emma's decision to research and share the soldier's story underscored the importance of bearing witness, of giving voice to those who can no longer speak. It was a poignant reminder that hauntings are not just about ghosts but about the human need to confront and honor the past. As I completed this chapter of the animation, I was struck by the resilience and compassion that emerged from a haunting. Emma's journey transformed the spectral encounter into a powerful narrative of empathy and remembrance, enriching the series with its emotional complexity. It was a testament to the idea that sometimes, the most profound ghost stories are those that connect us not to fear, but to the shared human experience of loss and memory. Through Emma's eyes, the battlefield came alive not just as a place of tragedy but as a living monument to courage and sacrifice. Her story became a bridge between worlds, inviting viewers to look beyond the surface of ghostly apparitions and into the hearts of those who linger in memory. It was a haunting that spoke softly but deeply, a story of connection that transcended time. As the threads of these stories wove together, a larger tapestry began to emerge, one that stretched beyond individual hauntings and personal encounters, touching on the universal human desire to connect with something beyond the tangible world. Each tale, from the creaking Victorian house to the spectral soldiers on a battlefield, revealed a facet of our shared fascination with ghosts and the mysteries that linger just out of sight. What drives us to seek out these stories? Is it fear of the unknown, or a yearning to understand what lies beyond death? Perhaps it is a mixture of both, intertwined with a hope that the spirits we glimpse are not just remnants of the past but bridges to a greater truth. Ghost sightings offer more than chills and thrills. They invite us to confront the boundaries of reality and belief, to question what we know and what remains elusive. Through these narratives, I saw how ghost stories serve as mirrors reflecting our deepest emotions: grief, regret, longing, and sometimes, comfort. The family in the Victorian house wrestled with fear and disbelief, yet found themselves drawn into a silent dialogue with the past. The farmhouse inhabitants faced escalating disturbances that challenged their sense of safety, evolving into an intimate encounter with a sorrowful spirit. On the battlefield, friends witnessed history replayed in ghostly form, reminding us of the sacrifices etched into the land itself. Emma's connection to the fallen soldier deepened the story's emotional texture, illustrating how hauntings can evoke empathy and a profound sense of memory. Animating these stories allowed me to explore the subtle interplay between light and shadow, sound and silence, presence and absence. The visuals became a language of suggestion, hinting at what cannot be fully seen or explained. The sounds, whispers, footsteps, distant melodies served as echoes of lives once lived, reverberating in the spaces between moments. This immersive experience aimed to draw viewers into the emotional landscapes of those who have encountered the supernatural, offering a glimpse into the fragile space where reality blurs with the unknown. The recurring theme across all these stories was the liminal space, the threshold between worlds where the living and the dead seem to touch. These are the moments charged with tension and wonder, where time folds and memories seep through the cracks of our perception. Whether in a family home or a bloodstained field, these spaces hold stories that refuse to be forgotten, voices that seek recognition, and spirits that long for connection. In reflecting on these encounters, I was struck by the resilience of the human spirit in facing the unknown. The families and friends in these stories did not simply flee from the ghosts, they sought understanding, empathy, and sometimes healing. Their experiences remind us that hauntings are not just about fear but about the ongoing relationship between the past and the present, the living and the departed. This project also underscored how ghost stories are deeply personal yet profoundly communal. They are shaped by individual perceptions and emotions, but they also tap into collective histories and shared cultural meanings. The spectral soldiers were not just figures from history but symbols of sacrifice and memory that resonate across generations. The family's haunted homes became microcosms of broader human experiences: loss, love, fear, and hope. As viewers journey through these animated stories, they are invited to ponder their own beliefs and fears about the supernatural. The narratives do not offer definitive answers but instead open space for wonder and speculation. They challenge us to consider what lies beyond our empirical understanding and to acknowledge the mysteries that continue to captivate human imagination. Ultimately, these ghost stories illuminate the complex ways in which we engage with death, memory, and the unknown. They remind us that behind every apparition is a story, sometimes tragic, sometimes comforting, that speaks to our shared humanity. In confronting these stories, we confront ourselves, our fears, our hopes, and the enduring question of what happens when life slips away. Bringing these tales to life through animation has been a journey into the heart of mystery and emotion. It has deepened my appreciation for the power of storytelling to bridge worlds and touch souls. As the shadows lengthen and the unseen stirs, these stories linger, quiet reminders that the past is never truly gone, and that the desire to connect with what lies beyond is as old as humanity itself. Through this exploration, I invite viewers not just to be witnesses but participants in the ongoing dialogue between the living and the dead. To listen with open hearts, to question with thoughtful minds, and to hold space for the mysteries that refuse to be silenced. Because in the end, it is this search for understanding, for connection, for meaning that makes ghost stories endure, whispering through time and shadow, calling us to look beyond and wonder.